These are the lecture notes for Chapter 18 on the urinary system. Sometimes you'll see the urinary system called the excretory system, especially like I teach general biology classes as well as anatomy and physiology. And typically in anatomy and physiology, it'll be called the urinary system. But in biology, sometimes they'll call it the excretory system. But the excretory system actually includes the urinary system plus just any examples where the body is getting rid of waste. So it would include sweating, and it would include defecation, or going number two. You would it would also include the digestive system, I guess. So I like calling it the urinary system because that's more specific. But anyway, okay, so the first few slides go through the learning outcomes, and I'm going to skip them just for time. The major functions of the urinary system are excretion, elimination, and homeostatic regulation. Now, excretion and elimination are similar. They kind of, it's kind of like you can't really have one without the other. But excretion refers to the removal of organic waste, such as urea, from body fluids. Then elimination of these waste into the external environment would refer to, for example, defecation, or the elimination of solid waste, and urination or micturition, which is the process of urinating. That's the elimination of, the waste through the kidneys and the urinary system. And then excretion also involves sweating, and the elimination of waste through our skin involves sweating. So excretion and elimination sort of fall in the same, they overlap. And then there's homeostatic regulation, and I'm actually going to spend a little bit of time on that when we get to the end of this chapter, because it does relate to a lot of different medical conditions called acidosis and alkalosis. And so I'm going to go over those medical conditions and how they can occur, and what the body does to regain homeostasis, to regain balance of acids and bases and pH levels. So, but first, let's just talk about the urinary system in general. It consists of the kidneys, the ureters, which are tubes that lead from the kidneys to the bladder, and then the urinary bladder, which stores urine. So the kidneys produce the urine, the ureters transport it to the bladder stores it, and the urethra eliminates it from the body. What you will notice about the kidneys in this picture, it's a good picture to show you the left and right kidney and the different positions of the left and right kidney. Also notice that on top of each kidney is this kind of pyramid-shaped gland, and it's called the adrenal glands, because the word renal, R-E-N-A-L, renal refers to the urinary system and the kidneys in particular. So adrenal literally means sits on top of the kidney. So the adrenal glands, which produce what a lot of people call adrenaline, but it's a neurotransmitter called epinephrine, which activates your sympathetic nervous system. And the adrenal glands also produce cortisol, which is, the stress hormone. So other things as well, but those are two that are well known that the adrenal glands produce. So you can see here that the left kidney I got distracted. The left kidney sits a little higher than the right kidney. And both of these kidneys are what we call retroperitoneal. They are behind the peritoneum, which is the lining that covers the abdominal organs or the abdominal viscera. The kidneys are actually behind that lining. So they're closer to the back. They actually are along the sides or the lateral position of the vertebrae, the lumbar vertebrae. So the two kidneys, they function to produce urine. The urinary tract, which leads away from the kidneys and out of the body, includes the ureters, the bladder, and the urethra. And then urination is also called micturition. The elimination of urine is known as micturition. Now, other functions, and you'll notice, by the way, I highlight in yellow the notes that I would like for you to make sure that you pay attention to, and if you're taking notes, which I strongly encourage, that you pay attention to the highlighted text and the words in bold. Now, nothing's highlighted on this page, but I'm not going to skip it because there are a few other functions listed on this slide, which is slide number 8. I just want to mention, so the urinary system, besides removing waste, it also regulates blood volume and pressure. And this is very important because this is where the urinary system and the kidneys overlap with the cardiovascular system and the heart and the blood vessels. So basically, when one of these systems isn't functioning, if one of these systems fails, the other one is eventually going to fail. If the cardiovascular system fails, if a person goes into what they call, gosh, I can't think today. Cardiac. What? I don't understand why I can't think of this today, but if one system fails, if the heart fails, the kidneys are gonna follow. They're gonna fail unless medically the medical professionals can regulate the situation. But when one of those fails, the other one does. They both are dependent on one another. So the kidneys actually help regulate blood volume, and blood volume, when blood volume is high, blood pressure is high. When blood volume is low, blood pressure is low. So regulating blood volume will affect blood pressure. Regulating blood pressure will affect sometimes, well, not as much. Blood pressure doesn't really affect blood volume, but regulating the blood volume can regulate the blood pressure. And that a lot of times is what happens with the kidneys is when they're in the process of making urine, of producing urine by filtering the blood and removing the waste from the blood, the kidneys are able to adjust the composition of the urine, and that helps to regulate blood volume and blood pressure. So we'll talk more about that. But just remember for now that the urinary system and the cardiovascular system are highly interdependent on one another. The urinary system also regulates the concentration of plasma ions. That plasma, remembers, the fluid portion of the blood. So these ions would be sodium, potassium, chloride, calcium, and others, but these are the most important 4. And the urinary system helps stabilize blood pH by regulating the amount of the concentration of hydrogen ions. If the blood pH is too low, then it has too many hydrogen ions, and the urinary system will remove them. Has different ways of removing the hydrogen ions, and if the blood pH is too high, the urinary system can add hydrogen ions. And the urinary system also helps us conserve valuable nutrients like glucose and amino acids. And this actually happens during the first step of urine formation, which is called filtration. The first thing that the kidneys do is filter everything out of the blood besides the large blood cells and the large proteins, but all the water and all of the solutes that are dissolved in the water, all of that is filtered out of the blood. But when glucose and amino acids, which are important to our cells, when these are filtered out, that means that our cells aren't getting the glucose, and they can't break down that glucose in the process of cellular respiration and produce energy. So all of the glucose and most of the amino acids that are filtered out of the blood into the what we call filtrate, it's called filtrate before it's called urine, but all of that glucose is actually reabsorbed back into the blood. So the first step of urine formation is filtration, where everything's filtered out of the blood. And then the second step is reabsorption, where important things are reabsorbed back into the blood, so that we don't lose them, and our cells can still have access to these important chemicals. Okay, so checkpoint questions. I go over most of these when I get to them. The three major functions of the urinary system, the first two start with E, remember, excretion, elimination, and then the third one was homeostatic regulation. The organs of the urinary system, it's a really easy system because there's not a lot of organs. It's pretty simple. But then when you get to urine production, that's not simple at all. But the organs are the kidneys, ureters, bladder, and urethra. And micturition is the process of voiding or urination. I noticed over the years that like a CNA or a nurse will use the word void. We'll use the word voiding. So in medical settings, that's what you tend to use. But the actual anatomy word is micturition. All right, we went over this already. The right kidney sits lower than the left because of the liver. That's the reason for that. And the kidneys are retroperitoneal. And the adrenal glands sit on top of each kidney. So here you see another picture. You can see it in cross section. So you can see where this is a kidney. And you can see how it's toward the spine or the vertebrae. So the kidney is like very close to your back, your lower back. You can see that it's alongside of the spleen and the pancreas. The pancreas is also retroperitoneal. But it is more toward, the kidneys are more toward the back than they are toward the front, toward the stomach. Okay. The kidneys are shaped like kidney beans or other beans, but they're mostly compared to a kidney bean, and so they have an indentation on one side. Each kidney does. That indentation is called the hilum. Now, hilum is a word you see in anatomy. It's an anatomy term that literally just means indentation. There's other structures that have a hilum besides the kidney, but the hilum in the kidney is the indentation, and it's where the renal artery and renal nerves enter the kidney, and it's where the renal veins and ureters exit the kidney. So that's the hilum. And then here you can see a cross section, and we'll just look at the kidney structure. In fact, I can blow it up. So I want to look at the figure A first. So if we cut through the kidney, if we just basically cut it in half and look at it in cross section, the outermost layer of the kidney is called the renal cortex. And then the renal medulla is below that. So the renal medulla is here. And in the renal medulla, you can see these structures called pyramids. And in between the pyramids, you see the columns. But just know that the outer portion is called the cortex, and then the inner portion is called the medulla. Now, when you get into this very, very inside portion, these are collecting areas. So first you have, when urine is produced in the renal cortex and renal medulla, once that urine is produced, it is collected into, first of all, the minor calyces, this is a minor calyx, and plural would be calyces. So you see all these minor calyces that collect together into major calyces, and then they drain into the renal pelvis. And the renal pelvis drains into the ureters. So all of that urine that's produced by each nephron, each filtering unit of the kidney, and there's millions of nephrons, each nephron produces a small amount. And here you can see a blown up picture of a nephron. Each one of these nephrons, the dark purple structure here, are urine producing units of the kidney. They're the functional units of the kidney, and they will produce a little bit of urine. And so all of the millions of nephrons together produce a small amount of urine, which is collected into the minor calyx, major calyx, and the renal pelvis. Since we're looking at a nephron, I'll just tell you what you can see at the top here, where the structure called the renal corpuscle and the PCT, or proximal convoluted tubule, and also the DCT, or distal convoluted tubule, all of these are located in the cortex, the renal cortex. This particular nephron is called a juxtamedullary nephron because the nephron loop extends into the medulla. So the nephron loop will extend depending on which type of nephron it is, whether it's a cortical nephron, which means that it remains, the nephron doesn't extend as deeply into the medulla, or if it's a juxtamedullary nephron and that those extend into the medulla, like you see this one here. Okay, so we will start with slide number 15 in the next recording.